Welcome to Suncoast In Depth podcast. We are starting into a new series, kind of a book study on the book called The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. And I'm excited about this, but actually what inspired me to do that is getting a string of text messages one night when you were in Dallas.
Yeah.
I had already read the book, but all of a sudden I'm getting these quotes from you.
Yeah.
Is it true, or is it just an urban legend that you read that whole book sitting in a Barnes & Noble?
Yeah. I was at the Starbucks in Dallas. Well, in Frisco, there's the Stonebriar Center, which is a humongous mall. And there's a Barnes & Noble 2-story, and at the top there's a Starbucks up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was waiting for the kids. They were at school. They had some sort of after-school thing, extracurricular thing. And I just went to the mall to just kind of wait it out. And I was there for about 2.5 hours, something like that. And read the book in about 2.5 hours straight through, man. I couldn't put it down.
What the crap?
And
what are you, a speed reader or something?
well, dude, when you have to learn that when you're having to read 200 pages a day when you're in a doctoral program. But
yeah,
I had never read the book before, and it was just quote after quote after quote that was just flying off of the page and just like nailing me and confirming
so many things.
yeah, confirming things. And so I just thought I'd bother you and send it over.
Well, I'm glad you did, because it really did inspire me to read it again. And I was just struck, I'm ashamed to admit, by how many of the quotes I was like, I don't remember that. But they were so good.
Yeah.
And so I thought, man, I got to reread this. So I'm just looking at my Audible, right? Because that's usually how I read things. And at one time, speed, it's like 9 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, of a narrator reading it, and you read it in 2.5 hours.
Yeah. I was booking.
And you
And I
picked
feel
up-
bad because I was underlining stuff in the book and I just put it back on the shelf. I didn't actually buy it. So someone is going to get a annotated copy when they get home.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I wanted to talk about the first chapter because, like we did with the last series, I wanted to have discussions, in podcast form like this about each of the chapters. We're just going to kind of go through it and see how the discussions go. And so I thought it'd be cool for us to toss around these ideas, because the reality is that it's not like a light read, right?
No.
It's really not, even though you read it in 2.5 hours. Maybe it is a light read for you. I don't know.
No, I thought it was good.
But it's rich. And it does affirm a lot of the theology and even philosophy of ministry that we have at Suncoast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that it's a lot of material that I think deserves a little more explanation.
Yeah.
So he makes a distinction. The first chapter is called Christ is not Jesus' last name. Hey, Kyle, did you think that Christ was Jesus' last name?
I thought it was
Jesus Christ.
Because your dad always yelled at you like that.
Yeah. Funny story. Esther was. She went back to Dallas last week for her cousin's daughter's birthday, and her cousin is really like her sister, and so the daughter is 4 years old, and that's really like her niece. She calls her Aunt Esty, me, Uncle Troy, and she was telling me the story that Caroline was getting into line at school one day, and she came back, she goes, "It really works. Jesus' name really works." And Mom's like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "All the kids were being crazy and getting out of line." And I said, "Get in line, Jesus." And they just all got in line. So I was like, well, maybe that's not exactly how you use Jesus' name. But she was like, "You all need to get in line. Jesus Christ." she said they followed suit.
Yeah.
So now she's just going to start yelling Jesus Christ and get whatever she wants, I guess, man.
And somebody else, I think it was my father-in-law, said that for the first few years, the dog thought that its name was Jesus Christ because he'd yell at it. But
Yeah, man.
anyway, so he starts off the chapter, with this Christ is not Jesus' last name, and I wonder how many Christians do think that Christ is his last name. I
Yeah.
don't know,
Yeah.
but it's really more of a title, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And Rohr kind of takes that word Christ and expands on it. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah.
He expands so that it takes in the meaning of what we would probably call the Logos from John's Gospel, or even just God, right? Or God as visible.
Yeah.
Okay, the visible manifestation of God, right?
Yeah.
And so he makes this distinction between Jesus and the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And most Christians don't do that,
No,
right?
no.
Most Christians, they think of Jesus and Christ as this guy,
Yeah.
right, in history. And Rohr makes a distinction there between Jesus and Christ. And it might even be problematic for some Christians to think of that distinction. That I'm tempted to say a separation, but I don't know if it's that.
No.
But do you think that this is problematic? Do you
No,
think
no. I don't think
think
there's
he's straying from the pale of orthodoxy?
Yeah, I mean it's a strange maneuver that he makes, right? It's a strange one because it's counterintuitive to most theology that exists. Even when you think of Catholicism, which Rohr comes out of, like it's very different than that. But I think you're right. I think he broadens the parameters, right? The liminality of what Christ means to include and encompass the Logos, which we use the word to describe, which is an awful translation.
Agreed.
Because then when we hear the word, we automatically think Bible.
Yeah.
And that's not it,
Yeah.
And we were talking about how words signify certain things in, theological spectrum. And when we hear them, we associate them with often erroneous ideas that have nothing to do with those words.
For sure.
But what I think Rohr is trying to do here is to show that, like, there's what's the when you put letters at the end, ly or nes, what do we call that? Not the prefix goes before, but there's a. I'm not an English major.
I'm not either.
But there's a ness that he's trying to. When you want to describe like the aura or the essence of something, you just put ness at the end of it. It's like, oh, that's awesomeness.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so Brettness.
Yeah.
But there's a Christness or a Godness to these elements that I think Rohr is trying to describe, and I think he does a really good job, even though it may be, again, counterintuitive linguistically or within language that we're not accustomed to. And so that immediately creates problems for people who think of Jesus Christ as being one and the same, like inseparable, right? So
Yeah. I got a quote here from his book. Christ is God, and Jesus is the Christ's historical manifestation in time. Jesus is a third someone, not just God and not just man, but God and human together. So it's wild, right? That
Yeah.
quote kind of like you see him running in the opposite direction of orthodoxy and then somehow pulling orthodoxy along with it.
That's right. That's right. It's a good analogy.
It's
yeah.
pretty cool. So he's not denying that Jesus is God in the flesh. He's just further defining it, expanding what that means. I think. But this chapter really focuses on what theologians call incarnational theology, right? And which again is something that's kind of foreign to most Christians, I think, especially in popular American evangelicalism. Let's say incarnational theology is usually, or incarnation rather, is just something they think of that occurred at Jesus's birth, right? God went into this
Yeah.
human vessel, which is true.
Yeah.
But again, he kind of expands on that,
Yeah.
right? But not just him, because incarnational theology is a real serious branch
yeah.
of Christian theology. And so he expands by looking at the creation itself, right? So he goes all the way back to Genesis, and he quotes Genesis 1, and he talks about light as this means by which we see. So it's not even that light is the focus itself, but it's the means by which we see things. So we see differently.
Yeah.
And he likens that to what John opens up his gospel with in his own creation account that includes this concept of logos, right? And that this logos in Jesus is the light to all humanity. But he says this, he says, everything visible without exception, is the outpouring of God. What else could it really be? Christ is a word for the primordial template, logos, through whom all things came into being, and not one thing had its being except through him. So one of the quotes that you texted me was, instead of saying that God came into the world through Jesus, maybe it would be better to say that Jesus came out of an already Christ-soaked world. So given what we just read from him and the quote that you sent me, like, what were you thinking or feeling maybe when you read that?
Yeah, that's it's a very powerful yet dangerous quote, because orthodoxy, evangelicalism, believes that Christ came into from somewhere, right? From the divine Godhead or whatever that existed. And there's always been this sense of separation between the reality in which we exist and be and the reality of God. And we need that God to somehow come into the immanence of space and time, whatever. And it's funny, man. You hear Christians talk very strangely. Well, God exists outside of time, and blah 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 blah. I was like, explain that. Like I'm preaching on time this Sunday, and I go, well, time is. It's like Augustine. I agree with Augustine. I understand time until I start trying to talk about it. And when I hear these big fluffy things like, well, God is outside of time and space. Yeah, how do you know that? How do you know that? Like, no, God is time, is space, and there is nothing to come into that he is not already within. And that's what Rohr is saying. And when he says that, dude, it just screws with your thinking about this notion of, oh, God somehow put on a human costume, and that was unique to Jesus, and only Jesus could be the Christ or whatever. When in fact, Jesus is saying things like, yo, you guys are going to do greater things than me. Well, how can he say that? How can he say that unless it's ultimately true for him always already, that the reason you're going to do it is because you're going to awaken to the truth that God is already there within, being within you.
Yeah.
And that's what it says, is that Christ didn't come into the world. Christ came from within it. And it was already Christ-soaked. And what Rohr means by that, I mean, we could take a guess, but ultimately it's that all the things that we see in existence, all the things that are visible to us, contain elements, particles, whatever you want to call them, of the divine essence of what God is.
Yeah.
We focus too much, I think, on the personhood, right? The personage of God and who is God. And I'm more concerned with what is God, because God is not human, but is in humanity, and that's I think that's where Rohr's trying to go with this.
Yeah. And that gets back to the quote that that I read before that one. Everything visible, everything without exception is the outpouring of God. So our friend Kevin O'Hara is a math and science guy, right? And I pastored with him for 10 years before we came to Suncoast. And one day we were just sitting around talking like you and I do sometimes, just about things that interest us. And, we got talking about the Big Bang and all the evidence around it and so on from cosmology and whatnot. And he talked about the singularity. And the singularity, in essence, it's like the infinitely dense, infinitely hot point from which the entire reality burst forth. Okay?
Yeah.
And all the math works for this up until you get to like just a few like nanoseconds before the actual Big Bang. And they don't know. That's a mystery before that. But I got to thinking when he was explaining the singularity, this whole concept, right? I got to thinking that's a fitting analogy for what Rohr's doing here, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's like this singularity, what we could call God, right? And that everything comes from this singularity. And so all of it, like you said, is already, if that's true, all of it is already just an extension of that ultimate reality.
That's right.
And that can radically change you the more you buy into that idea. And I think that's why he says, what else could it really be?
Yeah.
And even in another place, he says, look, for Christians, for Jews, for Muslims, they all believe that God is the creator of all things, everything.
Yeah.
That's orthodox, right?
Yep.
Like it or not,
Yep.
everything, including if you have this idea of the devil that is, this person and so on. Yeah, that was created.
Yeah.
And the potential for, if you believe in free will, the potential for them to have that freedom, and so all things, man. Think about that.
All
Everything. So that means all the governing laws of physics, the potentialities for knowledge and evolution and everything is in that little whatever
that
infinitely
was.
small, infinitely dense, infinitely. What is that? I mean, it's just God. It just blow your head up, right?
That's right.
But that's really kind of where he's coming from.
Yeah.
Like if you believe that God is the creator of all things, then he is the creator of all things. And if that's true, then that should change your perspective on all things.
Yeah.
Right? Like when I'm looking at a pebble. So I got a little story. I walked out yesterday. I just said, okay, my watch pinged me and said, hey, you got to get up and move, It does that a lot to me.
Yeah.
But I paid attention to it. And I said, all right, I'm going to go take a prayer walk, right? And I thought, because I had been reading this stuff, I thought, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go get in touch with the pattern of life, death, and resurrection. And I'm going to go. We had just gone through this hurricane a few weeks ago, Hurricane Ian. And I'm going to go walk in this beautiful grove area, that we have on the church property. And I'm going to contemplate the death of those beautiful oak trees that came over, broke and they're dead. And those guys are going to end up cleaning it up soon. And I want to go out and get in touch with that pattern again,
Yeah.
So I did. I went out there, I'm praying. Sure enough, they're out there with chainsaws and made it kind of hard to meditate,
Yeah.
But as I'm walking and thinking about that whole pattern, I come upon this. Well, actually, it came upon me. Really, it was a big, like monarch. I'm not a butterfly expert, but it looked like a monarch. It was yellow. It was orange and black.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if I thought they were migrational, and I didn't know if I should be seeing one of these or not,
Right.
But I did, and it flutters around in front of me, and then it lands in front of me, and I looked at it, and because I was reading this stuff, this sounds silly, but
No.
I looked at it and I go, "Hey, Lord,"
Yeah.
But as silly as that sounds, in a very real sense, if I believe that all things have their beginning, that the ground of being itself
Yeah.
is God, and I do believe that, then in a sense, when I say, hey, Lord, to that butterfly, I am saying, hey, to the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. In some
I mean,
way.
is that in some way, right?
Yeah.
I'm not pretending to know exactly how that works
Yeah,
or anything
yeah.
like that, but it was, as silly as it may sound to some, it was a moving experience for me.
Yeah, man.
You know, not only that, I'm looking at all these dead oaks, these majestic trees that have been there for God knows how long.
Yeah.
And this one frickin' storm comes through and ruins so many of them. That beautiful grove, you
Yeah.
know, it just makes me sick.
Yeah, man.
But then to be reminded of the rest of that cycle, right?
Yeah.
The rest of that pattern is resurrection by that butterfly, which is a symbol of the resurrection.
Yeah.
And
That's cool, man.
yeah, it was cool. It was. So anyway, I think it's important to. I think it's vital for the survival of Christianity. I know Rohr talks about this too, that we stop thinking at this kind of baseline level that the church has been stuck in,
Mm-hmm.
where incarnation simply is about the indwelling Logos in the man Jesus of Nazareth, and begin to see that presence in everything.
Yeah.
And he even goes so far, I think he goes so far as to say that he thinks that this is the unique contribution that Christianity can make to religion, to use a loaded term, but to religion. What do you think of that?
I think that's absolutely right. I was at the beach yesterday afternoon. It must have been a little after 5 or whatever. I'd done some reading, writing, and I talked about this idea of the difference between having one's perspective changed, which is, I think is important. But there's all sorts of ways in which our perspectives can be changed through education, whatever, knowledge. But there's something that I think was even more valuable to that, and that's understanding like the proximity to things.
Oh yeah, we were talking about this. Yeah,
And perspective can't change my proximity, but proximity can always change my perspective. And to live a life believing in God, having a theistic belief or whatever,
like
But-
a mental assent. You mean?
yeah, right. This idea of, because again, we spend a lot of time responding to emails of people who have questions and they're just curious about our theology here. Like trying to give them new perspective through words. Like, well, that doesn't really mean that. Okay, well, I disagree. But it's when you close that proximity, that space between that which I don't fully understand, and it's not just perspectival anymore, but it's in proximation. The space has been closed. And when I get that understanding that there is no space between God and myself, right? There is the proximity is immediate.
Yeah.
It is incarnational, right? And it's not just an intellectual assent to believe and hold on to certain opinions or ideas or doctrines or dogmas or creeds or whatever, but it is the incalculable understanding that my proximity to God is always already immediate. And when I awaken to that truth, there is a freedom that happens. Where the Spirit of God is, there is freedom. Well, when I know where the Spirit of God is, that's when there's freedom, when I am in proximation to that. And I think that's what Rohr is trying to get at, is to awaken people to this truth. And I think that's what the contribution Christianity can make, is that all things are indwelled with God. This is why I think the psalmist says, where can I go? Where can I go to escape your presence? I can't go there. I can't go here. I can't go anywhere because you go with me, because you're already in me. And it's not a freedom. The fear of the evangelical mind, the more conservative mind, the fear is that, well, if that's true and universal salvation is true and all these things, then I just have freedom to do whatever I want to do. It's like a licensure to be immoral. I never felt that way. When I came to fully grasp the proximity to which God and I am a child of God. And that gave me a sense of freedom to no longer fear. It never once said, oh, well, now that I don't have to worry about some eternal damnation and fire, hell. Now I can go do what I really want to do. No, it actually was quite the opposite. It made me want to love deeper. It made me want to tell people this good news, right? That you can live in that freedom. You don't have to live in fear. Doubt is not the same as being in despair. You can have doubts without despair and so forth. And I think that's the fear that the teaching we teach here at Suncoast, what Roar's writing about in the Universal Christ, is it upsets people and gets them to immediately think about the immorality of human behavior, as opposed to, man, this deepens my connection to what God is and what God wants in my life, and that is to become the best version of myself. And there's nothing wrong with that, man.
I mean, think about it, and just from a practical perspective, my son this morning pissed me off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He's gone through some transitions school-wise, and we had him in one school that we thought help him with his particular disability.
Mm-hmm.
And the teachers were honest with us and said he's too high functioning for the school. But while he was in there, we noticed this profound change in his attitude. He's usually happy-go-lucky, Joseph, everybody knows this about him. He's just always smiling, always, everybody loves him that meets him, right? And all of a sudden he was coming home and he had this attitude of like, he was like brooding over something, and he has communication issues. So it's hard for him to articulate, what it is that he's feeling. And so we were trying to get it out of him, and talking with a child psychiatrist, who's in our extended family. And so per her counsel, not trying to push him into answering until he's ready to answer in whatever way he can, that kind of thing. So it was just hard, and he was just like so uncharacteristically being rude with me, with his mom, with his brother, with his grandfather, which was super weird.
Yeah.
They call each other the best friends,
Yeah.
And so we just didn't know what to do. Well, then when his teachers came to me and said, hey, he's too high functioning for this class. We're not meeting his needs, which I won't get into, but was really just fundamentally good of them, okay? Because they get funding, right?
Yeah.
And so they're giving that up
Yeah.
to do what's best for him, We felt very loved by their honesty, And so we noticed, though, as soon as he heard that, his attitude started coming back, like his good nature started coming back, right?
Yeah.
And but now we're transitioning to another school, and he's feeling the angst of that, And so this morning, last night I brought him over here to Bob and Rita's art class, And on the way, I talked to him about his attitude towards mom, especially, and for other reasons. He's always struggled with women. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Probably has something to do with the orphanage that he was part of in Uganda, right? And he's just like being cold with her and stuff still, and so I said to him, I said, "Listen, man, it's okay if mom did something that upset you or said something that angered you or whatever, hurt your feelings. It's okay to say that. And I know mom has said this to you. And mom hasn't said anything to me, but I've noticed that you're being really cold towards her. and you're not answering her when she calls for you, and you wait until I say something. It's like, I'm just trying to understand what that's about.
Yeah.
You know? And he said, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. I don't feel that way. No, I don't feel that way. Okay. I just wanted to make you aware that I'm seeing this. Okay. So he goes into the art class. And then this morning, I had to drop off. Ben needed the other car for work. And so that's our other son. And so I took Joseph and Mom here to drop her off for school. She's a teacher at the school. And dropped her off, and she and I said goodbye, kissed, and love you. And she turns around and says goodbye to Joseph. I love you. And he says nothing. And I was pissed, man. I was pissed. So she said, okay. So she got out of the car, and then we're driving away. I'm like, dude, I can't believe that you just did that. I literally just talked to you about this last night.
Yeah.
And you do this to her. She's like the kindest, sweetest person, and I said, look, man, my goal isn't to guilt you. I just don't understand what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
But my whole point in bringing this up, right, I'm thinking to myself, as I'm brooding with anger.
Yeah.
I'm literally like in conversation with God, with Christ, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, like, I don't know how to
Yeah.
deal with this.
Yeah.
You do. I'm just trying to tap in here.
Yeah.
And it's weird because you start to, just by doing that, you start to, again, see Jesus sitting in that back seat of the car,
Yeah.
brooding on his phone, right?
Yep.
You can still see Jesus there.
Oh, yeah.
And how you start to deal with that issue changes fundamentally
For sure.
when you can do that,
That's right.
And I think better. I'll let you know. We'll have to do,
Yeah. Follow
do an
up.
update. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my point is that it really does change your whole,
Yep.
the way that you see everything and everyone
Yeah.
in your life. And it would be hard to argue that isn't a better way of seeing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, let me ask you this. So even if all this was bunk,
Yeah.
right, would that still be a better way of seeing the world and people?
Indeed.
It's hard to argue with that.
That corresponds to something innate within us, right? The idea of hope, and it's a powerful emotion.
Yeah, man.
And at the end, like Heidegger writes about in Being and Time, this idea of ultimately what constitutes our existence is care. It's a German word, Sorge. Like that's the motor.
What constitutes our existence? He says.
Like ultimately it's this notion of caring. Sorge. Sorge is a little bit caring. We think of something like giving attention to whatever, showing you that I care. No, it's more of a fundamental force. Like Nietzsche talks about this, like the will to power or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not an emotion. It is that thing, like this will to power in Nietzsche is that which allows Mount Everest to keep pushing into the sky. The blood in your veins is the will to power. It's care. It's Sorge.
Crazy. Yeah, that's awesome.
And ultimately, we do things, whether we say they're immoral or not. Like we do things based upon that Sorge. And I'm sitting at the beach yesterday, and this little Amish couple comes up, right? And they're wearing the blue jeans and the suspenders, and he's got the beard, and even the little boy's got the kind of crazy looking haircut or whatever. And I just look at them, and they have a very different, fundamentally, different idea about
Theological
God.
framework.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But yet, I see Christ in that, right? Because there is the Sorge. He, for better or worse, protects his family, keeps them in an isolated bubble. Right or wrong, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because he cares, right? And it's that ability, and I think that care is the grounding of the Christ, the Logos, right? Is that if I could see my son, even as I'm stewing with anger and, why would you treat your mom, who's an amazing woman, like that? But I still see Christ in you, right? if I could look at a death row inmate who's committed the most heinous crimes possible against his fellow humans and look at him and still go, but I still see Christ in you, dude. You know, you have to pay for you got to pay the consequences, of course, but I still see Christ in you. Christ has not abandoned you. He's not ceased. There's not a cessation of his Christness that is no longer in you because of your actions. No, I could still see it. And I think, you know, I've been down death row, dude. Like, I've been in prison ministry where I'm walking down death row and there are guys snarling at me. And, you know, I look over and I'm like, oh, that's weird. But there are other, and I think that's mental health stuff, obviously. But there are guys and they've done some heinous things. And you talk to them and the proximity again brings back their humanity, which brings back the image of Christ, you know? And so I think that's an important and a beautiful way to look at things is even in the midst of someone who's agitated me, who's cut me off in the middle of the road or whatever, doesn't matter. Can I still see Christ in them? Because if I can't, then that's more of a problem for me than it is for them. And
Yeah.
and that's where I think Roar's at, man. And I think he's right. And I think that's the best way to look at the world.
Imagine if this view of things began to spread,
Yeah.
how different the world would look, right? I mean, it's hard to even imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really where that's the essence of this chapter.
Yeah.
That God is that all things are in God and God is in all things. Panentheism, right?
Yeah.
And how that should change if we believe that.
That's right.
That should change how we see everything and everyone.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Thanks for talking about it.
Yeah. Can't wait for the class, man.
It's going to be good.